who'd been doing the job a lot longer. Hugh rattled through the main global headlines, the ongoing political mess, escalating foreign tensions, but I wasn't really paying attention. I was waiting for the latest on a different story, a story closer to home. One that's pretty much been the only topic of conversation among my friends and colleagues over the past week. And sure enough, Hugh didn't disappoint. Swiveling in the chair behind his desk, he stared straight into the camera and cleared his throat. As he began to speak, I felt a familiar dread building in my stomach. Police are expanding their search for the so-called meat cleaver killer after the body of a third victim was discovered on late Tuesday afternoon. This has been the latest in a string of horrific murders that have plagued the... I listened as Hugh reeled off the background to the case. I knew most of the facts already. Ever since the first death had been reported on a road not far from our office, it had been all anyone could talk about. Theories about the killer, grim details not available in the papers, rumors of severed limbs and dissected bodies, non-stop gossip and updates, non-stop fear. I guess a serial killer is always going to be a big talking point, but when the murders are happening in your area, it's different. You don't just feel like a distant observer anymore. You start to feel unsafe. It was as this thought crossed my mind that something happened. Something I was unable to explain. I couldn't make sense of it at the time, and I suppose I still can't. It made me feel like I might be losing my mind. The camera zoomed up for a close-up on Hugh's face. He stared back into it, his blue eyes unblinking. When he next spoke, it was as if he were addressing me directly. Police are advising residents in the area to take extra care when walking home, especially after dark, and to avoid quiet and poorly lit places at night. And if your name happens to be Sam, we'd advise you to take extra care. Now, onto the weather. I blinked and stared at the screen. Had I really just heard what I thought I heard? Had Hugh Agelte just said my name? It couldn't be. Of course it couldn't be. I was tired, that was all. Exhausted from a long day. I'd been struggling to sleep lately, and it was probably just catching up with me. At least, that's what I told myself. But, no matter what excuses I made, something was wrong. I knew it was. The sense of dread I'd felt when Hugh Agelte began his broadcast sat in my stomach like a stone. I picked up the remote and flicked off the TV. Then, after a moment, I picked up my laptop. In the age of live streaming and catch-up, there was no need for me to overthink this. I'd obviously just misheard Hugh, and by going onto the news channel's online stream and rewinding it a bit, I'd be able to prove it. I navigated to the site and found the live feed, dragged the little marker back a couple of minutes. As I watched Hugh Agelte launch into his roundup of the headlines again, I felt butterflies in my stomach, but not too many. I was pretty sure watching back the footage would set my mind at ease. It was a mistake, that was all. A simple case of tiredness and fear catching up with me. I'd heard something that wasn't really there. This time, as Hugh rounded off his segment on the meat cleaver killer, I leaned in close to the screen, watched as the camera zoomed in on his unsmiling face, and as he began giving his safety warning, I held my breath. Police were advising residents in the area to take extra care when walking home, especially after dark, and to avoid quiet and poorly lit places at night. And if you happen to be in the house on your own, then whatever you do, Sam, don't look under the bed. onto the weather. I slammed my laptop shut, threw it on the sofa next to me. I was breathing fast, and I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. There were no excuses I could make this time. None. I'd listened carefully, I'd concentrated, and I was absolutely sure I hadn't misheard anything. Hugh's advice was different to the first broadcast, but it was clear enough. Whatever you do, don't look under the bed. From upstairs, I heard the soft creak of a floorboard. I froze. Every nerve in my body suddenly tingled. I held my breath and stayed as still as I could, straining my ears over the sound of my pounding heartbeat. Nothing. No more noises. No more creaks. You're imagining it, that's all, I told myself. All of it. It's just your tired mind playing tricks on you. But I suddenly found a horrible image pushing its way into my head. The image of a man upstairs, hiding in the darkness, his eyes and teeth glinting in the shadows beneath my bed. His fingers tightened around the wooden handle of a meat cleaver as he waited for the sounds of my footsteps on the stairs. I shook the image off. My hands felt hot and sweaty. As I picked up my phone in a desperate attempt to distract myself, my fingers slipped across its screen. I unlocked it on the third attempt. I had to wipe my right hand on my jeans before the thing would recognize my thumbprint. With the screen unlocked, I tapped on a random news app without thinking. A list of stories appeared in front of me. My eyes scanned down it. This was more like it. The top of the app was filled with the entertainment news and celebrity gossip. Mindless stuff. As I scrolled down past the latest headlines, my heart gradually began to slow. I started feeling less afraid. But of course, it didn't last. About halfway down the page, I came across a headline that read, "Meat Cleaver Killer Claims Third Victim as Police Widen Search." I scrolled quickly past it, and as I did, that same creeping dread began to shift and roll in my stomach once more. Because it was happening the same inexplicable stuff I'd seen on the TV and on my laptop. The next headline that caught my eye was this: "Police advise residents who live alone to leave the house as quickly as possible." The one directly below it read, "Is the meat cleaver killer closer than you think?" And finally, just below that one, "Whatever you do, Sam, don't look under the bed." The name of that last article's author was Hugh Agelte. I locked my phone and placed it on the coffee table. My hands were shaking. Something fragile in my mind was starting to bend. It hadn't snapped. Not yet, at least. But it was close. I could feel it. Close to the breaking point. And as I sat there on my sofa, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I had to go upstairs and check the bedroom. I had to do what the news was telling me not to do. Because there was no man hiding under the bed, really, was there? It was all in my mind. It had to be. It was paranoia brought on by fear and lack of sleep. I stood up and walked to the bottom of the stairs. They stretched up into darkness. My skin felt itchy with sweat. My heart beat like a trapped animal in a cage. I strained my ears for any sound upstairs, any more creaking floorboards, but I couldn't hear a thing. So I began to climb. The walk up the steps and down the hall to my closed bedroom door felt like a dream. I didn't want to go in that room, not at all. I knew there was nothing to be afraid of, not rationally, but the thought didn't help. Dread consumed me. Despite how I felt, though, I couldn't see any alternative to confronting it head on. I took a breath and pushed open the bedroom door. It creaked inwards. My room was a nest of shadows. The curtains were drawn across the window, and the darkness made everything look sinister. My wardrobe and chest of drawers hunched in the blackness like monsters ready to pounce. I reached around the doorway, my hand shaking, and flicked the switch. Light spilled into the room. Its brightness made me squint. It banished most of the shadows, but not all of them. As I stood in the doorway, quickly scanning the area for any signs of movement, my eyes came to rest on the bed, at the slithers of darkness just visible beneath it. My bed rested against the wall at the far end of the corner, a nice big double. From my current angle, I couldn't see underneath it, not properly. I knew I'd have to go in for a closer look. The floorboards creaked as I moved across the room. Each sound made me wince. The dread in my stomach rolled and churned. My mind continued to bend beneath an enormous weight of fear. And as I got closer to the bed, something started to happen. All the unusual things I'd heard and seen in the news began rushing through my head. A barrage of words and sounds. The longer it went on, the more a strange conviction grew in my mind. That I was seeing the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't quite managed to fit together yet. A puzzle that it might be better if I didn't solve. If your name happens to be Sam, we'd advise you take extra care. Is the meat cleaver killer closer than you think? Whatever you do, don't look under the bed. The words whirled faster and faster in my mind. I was standing in front of the bed now. As the dread and terror inside me reached the crescendo, I lowered myself to my knees, and I peeked under it. Click. The final piece of the puzzle suddenly slotted into place. Hugh Ogelte, the news anchor I'd never seen or heard of before. I said his name again in my mind, more slowly this time. Hugh Ogelte. You are guilty. As I spoke the syllables and peered into the shadows beneath the bed, I felt a fragile part of my mind tear in two. There was no man hiding in the darkness. There was only a plastic bag. And as I reached into the shadows and grasped a hold of it, I already knew what it contained. I pulled the bag out into the light. I heard it scrape across the floorboards, took a breath, and opened it. Inside was a stained meat cleaver and the bloody, severed stumps of 3 fingers.
Third play. Time to close this one out.
There was a loud knock on the door, and my 8-year-old, half-lab, half-mutt Macy started barking. I answered the door to a man in a police officer's uniform. "What is it tonight, Frank?" I said. "Is Officer Thomas to you?" he said as he lowered his hand towards his gun. "You better shut that dog up before I do it for you." "You know she's tame and won't bite anyone," I said as I reached for her collar and put her in the bedroom. "Sorry, Officer Thomas," I said. "I didn't know you were on duty." "Quit being a smartass," he said. "Being a police officer is a 24/7 job. I'm always on duty, unlike you and your crappy office job where you work a few hours and are off every weekend." 24/7? You must get some killer overtime then, right? I said. "You know what I meant," said Frank. "What did I do this time, Frank?" I said. "Are you going to try and write me a ticket for illegally parking in my own driveway again?" The judge loved that one. You mowed your lawn when you knew I would be sleeping, he said. You think it is funny I have to be protecting your sorry ass on hardly any sleep. I'm not going to warn you again. Are you threatening me? I asked. You are really here because I mowed my yard at 9 a.m. before it got too hot outside? Why don't you just move already? He said, with a smug look on his face. Move? I said. I've been living here longer than you. This was my grandparents' house, who left it to me. You are the one who should move. Everything was perfect until you moved into the neighborhood. You need to move because I don't like living next to you, he said as he walked away. You need to check with me before you mow your lawn. I need my sleep since I'm a police officer. I slammed the door shut and lifted my middle finger into the air. Goddamn asshole. Then I went to let Macy out of the bedroom. 4 years of this nonsense. 4 long years. When he first moved in, I thought having a police officer next door would be a great thing. It might make the neighborhood safer since he would park his police car outside every night. And I used to think that someone who put their life on the line every day to protect people from the bad guys would be a respectful person and someone I would love to have as my neighbor. I could not have been more wrong. He thinks he runs the entire neighborhood. I have never met someone who is a bigger asshole than he is. He thinks that just because he is a police officer, that he has authority over everyone at any time. Even worse is, he isn't completely wrong. If you get on the wrong side of a police officer like him in this small town, he can and will make your life a living hell. It started as soon as he moved in. First, it was my dog crap in his yard one time. I even bagged it up when it happened, but that wasn't enough. Eventually, I had to build an 8-foot high privacy fence to keep Macy from accidentally crossing his property line. I didn't have the money, but if it would shut him up about having my dog sent to the pound and put to sleep, it was worth it. That dog is my best friend. Then, he complained that she barked too much when she was outside, and he couldn't sleep. Macy is your typical dog. She isn't a puppy, and only barks when someone knocks or the UPS truck goes by. She is not a loud dog, and only goes out a few minutes at a time, as she's an indoor dog. It's not just my dog, but he always finds something to be an asshole over. My car is too old, my yard needs to be mowed, but only when he allows it. I hate him. He hates me. I know he hates me. The only thing he hates more than me is the crows. And that is exactly why I feed the crows every single day. After he left, I let Macy out of the bedroom and went to the backyard to feed the crows. Feeding them always made me feel a little better when he would tick me off. Frank hates crows. He loved to garden before he moved here, but can't because the crows always eat everything he plants. He has tried everything to get rid of them, like a scarecrow, putting out poison, even trying to shoot them, but nothing works. What started as a petty act of revenge to get the crows to stay in our neighborhood to tick him off has actually turned into something I enjoy. After a while, you start to recognize individual crows. They all look like the same at first, but eventually you see some physical differences as well as some personalities. It is said that crows are some of the most intelligent birds in existence, and they never forget a person's face. After a few years of feeding them, I believe it. Crows are some of the most amazing animals in the world. It is just pure luck. Frank also hates them. My favorite bird is one I named Franklin. I named him that because no matter how big of an asshole Frank is, having my favorite crow named Franklin is just my way to make sure the name Frank is associated with something good. It is dumb and passive-aggressive as hell, but it is little victories like this that help me not let Frank beat me. Franklin sits on a telephone pole outside my yard every day. Morning and night he sits and watches. When I put the food out, he's always the first to eat. The other crows yield to him, at least when it comes to my yard. Sometimes he even brings me body parts of animals he's killed. At first it was weird, but I realized it was a gift. Kinda like I feed him my food, so he's sharing his food with me. It is pretty cool in a morbid type of way. He is my crow. She's dead. Macy is dead. That asshole killed her. He killed my best friend. I could tell something was wrong with her and got her to the emergency vet as fast as I could. But I wasn't fast enough. The vet did everything he could, but she was poisoned. The vet suspects she was given antifreeze. Apparently it tastes sweet and dogs will drink it. I don't know how he did it, but there was no doubt it was him. He has gone too far this time. I have got to do something. I went over to his house and banged on his door. He answered the door with a smirk on his face. "What do you want?" he asked. "You killed her. You bloody killed her," I said. "I know damn well it was you." "I haven't killed anybody," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You killed my dog," I said. "What proof do you have?" he smirked. "And what are you going to do about it?" I didn't say a word. I just stared daggers into his eyes. It took everything I had not to punch him in his face. I would have done it too, if he wasn't jacked up on steroids, and would have loved, more than anything, for me to give him an excuse to beat the crap out of me, and then put me in jail after. "You should go down to the station and fill out a police report. Since you are my neighbor, I will look into this one myself. I'll give you the special treatment you deserve." He laughed before shutting the door in my face. Goddamn asshole. There was nothing else to do except to go home. He won again. He always wins. I always thought once I grew up the bullying would stop. The bullies would eventually move on and become adults and get over whatever inferiority complex they had. But I was wrong. Some bullies grow up to become asshole cops and use their position to continue to bully others around they don't like. I grabbed a beer out of the fridge and went outside to feed the crows. I wouldn't be lying if I said I didn't cry. I broke down. She was my best friend and didn't deserve to die that way. I was alone without her. She was all I had that I truly cared about. I looked up from my seat, and on the other side of the porch, perched on a chair, was my crow, Franklin. He had never came this close before. He didn't move. He just sat and watched me. It was like he knew what happened, or noticed Macy was gone, and came to comfort me. And he sat, perched on the chair, watching me. I waited for him to leave, but he didn't. He just stayed. He killed her, Franklin. He did it. I know it with all my heart. He is the one who would do something like that. I even thought about putting up security cameras, but didn't. Maybe she would still be alive if I had. I poured my heart out to the crow. He didn't move. He didn't make a noise. He just sat there like he was listening to me. Somehow, I needed this. He won, Franklin. I have to move. I can't live next to the asshole who murdered my best friend. I'm sorry. I'm gonna miss you, buddy. I wish someone would kill that asshole for what he did. He deserves it for what he did to us. Franklin cried out aloud. "Caw! Caw!" then flew back to his post. I finished my beer and decided to go in for the night. The next morning I slept in late. I didn't really want to get out of bed and face the day at all without Macy by my side, but I forced myself out of bed anyways. I went to brew a pot of coffee and glanced out the window where I could see that asshole, Franklin, outside in his backyard, tending to his crappy garden. He was clearly ticked off and cursing at the crows who had destroyed his garden again. It gave me a little smile and a much-needed laugh to know my crows had taken something away from him. I poured my cup of coffee and went and sat outside on my patio. I looked up and Franklin was in his spot. I glanced around the sky and saw crow after crow sitting in the telephone lines, and then even more crows flying in the sky above. I've never seen so many crows before in my life. Never this many in my backyard area. It was like every crow in our state had congregated outside my backyard. Frank must have seen the same thing, because he was still in his backyard, yelling at the crows. I looked back at Franklin, who was still staring at me. He gave a loud cry and flew off his spot towards Frank's yard. The other crows near him followed after. I heard Frank scream, "Ah, goddamn birds! Ow, what the hell?" I looked back, and more crows were now flying down into his backyard, making loud screeching sounds. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could hear his screams. The sky was filled with crows swooping down, attacking Frank. It looked like a sea of black as the sky was filled with more crows. Where did all these crows come from? On and on, the waves of crows would go into Frank's yard and then fly off before the next round would go down. The privacy fence was too high for me to see the carnage on the other side, but his screams were bad enough. Finally, the screaming stopped. Almost as soon as it had started, the sky turned back from black to blue. The only sound I could hear was Frank's wife crying and begging for help. I went around and took a look over Frank's backyard and saw what was left of him. His body had been pecked apart from head to toe. It no longer looked like a person as much as a bloody piece of roadkill. His face was completely pecked and eaten off. His body had been eaten down to the bones in some places. It had only taken a few minutes, but the crows had made short work of him. The sight would have made me sick if it was anyone but Frank. The ambulance and seemingly half the police department had showed up soon after. He was one of their own, but nothing could be done. He was dead. I went back home and grabbed a beer. I went out to my porch and sat down to enjoy this moment. A few minutes later, my crow friend Franklin flew up carrying something in his mouth. He landed on the table in front of me and dropped Frank's bloody eyeball. He nudged it towards me as he wanted me to have it as a gift. He looked at me and gave one loud caw, and I returned a smile. He flew back to his spot and stood proud, watching. This must be why they call a large group of crows a murder. When I was young, my grandmother used to tell me stories about the island we lived on. She used to tell me about the fairies in the treetops, the spirits under the sea, the ghosts on the cliffs. But the story that stuck with me throughout my childhood were the stories about the demon in the woods, the Nightmaker. She used to huff and puff whenever I asked her to tell me the story. I was too young, she'd say. I'd have nightmares and keep her awake. She'd relent eventually though. She always did. The stories went that there was a demon that lived in these woods, a thing who saw nothing in love or family. It would watch us from the dark with hateful eyes for all that was beautiful. The people who lived near the forest had to be careful. The Nightmaker had a black soul, and he would drive all to despair if you let him near. He had so many tricks, so many ways to torture the people of the village. No trick was played twice. Even survival was not enough. Meeting him even once would scar you forever, and you would end up taking your own life. The one thing that always struck me about the Nightmaker was how purposeless he seemed. He had no reason to do what he did. All he wanted to do was show the townspeople how horrible the world really was. At the end, cowardly little me would be shivering. My grandma would tuck me into bed. She'd kiss me on my forehead and tell me the world was cruel, but she would be there for me. The old woman cared for me. She really did. On my 10th birthday, she got me an old-timey radio. She knew how interested I was in tinkering in machines. If I could fix it, she'd give me a prize. I think that was what attracted him. 3 days after my birthday, after Grandma kissed me, I was tucked into bed when I heard a noise, a tapping on the window. On my bedroom floor was a shadow of a man. I looked up at my window. My father was smiling at me. It had been so long since I saw my father's face. I forgot what he even looked like. I thought he was dead, but at the moment, I recognized his smile. Come on, kiddo, we gotta go to church. I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't care what he was talking about. I got out of bed and opened my bedroom window. As I did so, he held out his hand, beckoning me to come outside with him. Maybe he was taking me to heaven? He held my hand tight and I climbed out. Making sure I was okay, he led up to a path in the forest bordering on our house. We walked slow, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed the extra time holding his hands. As we headed into the trees, I heard a melody echo around us. The singing was coming from deep within the forest, in the direction we were walking. It's a nice song, isn't it? I must have nodded, because his smile grew wider. It was getting colder as we walked, and the song was getting closer. Children were singing it. Many, together. The trees, they were growing more twisted as we walked, their branches becoming more hand-like, like old men reaching out for me. His grip was so tight. His smile kept getting wider, stretching his skin as he stared into the dark. I gave slight resistance to his constraint. Come on, John. We have to get to the church. Dad, my name isn't John. His expression didn't change. If anything, his smile got wider. He raised one long, stretched finger and pointed it in front of us. Look at the church. A cave in the distance. A cave in the middle of the woods. It led down into the earth. His cold grip pulled me as he led me, as I lagged behind him. This allowed me to realize a disturbing fact. His legs were run backwards. Whatever was holding my hand, it wasn't human. I jerked my hand away from him, stumbling back, ready to run. Let's go inside the church, John. He turned to face me. and I screamed.
Oh, you think you know what you're doing?
The smile had grown and twisted the features of his face around it. His lips were ended around his eyes. So many teeth in a jaw that curved at me. The horrible grinning thing reached for me. I turned and bolted down the path. I glanced back to see the thing behind me, following me, walking at that same awkward pace, walking with those twisted legs. I can see you. The tree branches snagged at my clothes, clawing at my skin as I pushed through them, leaving red marks as they cut into my face. The cold air turned into a rotted wind of stale air and pushed me back. It felt like hours, my time in that forest. Hours, seeing that thing behind me. Hours, hearing that tune. Hours, struggling against the branches. All I could do was run. Away from the singing, away from the thing coming near me. When the light of my house came into view, I was about to collapse. My bedroom window, my grandma's house, my safe haven. I climbed in and locked the window after me. Crawling into my bed, I pulled my bed sheets up and waited, hoping to go to sleep or wake up from a nightmare. Slowly, after a few minutes had passed, I peeked out my covers to see a new shadow on my bedroom floor. It was there, standing outside the window. He was so horribly deformed now, a living, rotted tree smiling at me through the window, full black eyes and 2 red pinpricks in the center. It tapped on the window with those long fingers. Let me in. I kept dead still. The finger pointed to the radio. It cackled to life. Jack. Jack. John. Jerry. Come out, Jerry. Come out. You'll be safe with us, Jack. Come out. His voice. It was so wrong. It made me sick. Come to the church. Open the window. Open the window. Open the window. Go away! The radio burst into a mad chant. Open the window. 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 Go away! It stopped. For a moment. One day, you're going to leave the window open, and I'll crawl in, and I'll remember what you did. I'll make you remember too. Open the window, and I won't hurt you. It stood, dead silent, waiting. A melody came from the radio. The same song I'd heard in that forest, from that cave. Let's sing along, Jack. A horrible series of animal noises and shrieks echoed from the set. A woman in torture, a man laughing, all while the singing played. It was all such a horrible noise. My ears, they were being mutilated. Somewhere from upstairs, through that black cacophony, I heard a voice calling down. Jack? Jack, is that you? What's going on? The noises stopped. A frustrated voice came from the radio. Demonic howl. No presence of friendship left. You're going to be nothing. Nothing. You know where I see you in 10 years. I see you fat and dirty, hanging by a noose in your own room because you are so much of a failure. I was just sobbing at this point. Just go away. Please, go away. Let me tell you the truth, Jack. The world is horrifying. It is empty and dark. In the end, it won't even matter if you came with me or not. The voices started to fade, as did the shadow on my bedroom floor. You'll see that, Jack. You'll see that. My bedroom door flew open as my grandmother came in. She hugged me, but didn't say a word. She stayed by my side until I stopped sobbing and went to sleep. That night, I had a horrible dream. Something was holding my hand and dragging me through the woods to that cave deep within the forest. We went inside, and I saw the source of the singing. There were dozens of children, all naked and chained, lying on the cave floor. Their mouths moved up and down. All their chains led to a hole in the cave floor. As I stared into the hole, my twisted father emerged from the depths and reached for me. I jolted awake, trying to get away from that cold grip. It turned warm, and I saw my grandmother's face in the morning light. My grandmother had fallen asleep in a chair beside my bed. She was still holding my hand. Every night after that, for a week, she would stay with me. She wouldn't ask me what happened. It was like she just understood. I would never hear from my father again. Every so often, I'd be looking out the trees bordering on our house, and I'd see his face among the dead trees, smiling at me. One day, you're going to leave the window open. After the first time, I jammed the window lock, so it couldn't be opened. After that, life continued. Life went and hit me unprepared, like a turtle belly side up. Living was hard. I was alone a lot. After school ended, I went through the lowest point of my life. And I'm not about to go through my entire life story here, so I'll keep the details. But it was bad. Sometimes I could almost hear him. You know where I see you in 10 years. I see you fat and dirty, hanging by a noose in your own room because you were so much of a failure. This was the first time I'm admitting this to anyone. But there was a moment, I believe the words I heard that night, that I was going to end up in a noose. Through it all, even when I left the house, my grandmother would call me. She'd ask how I was doing, and I'd tell her I was alright. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel like a loser, having my grandma as my only friend in the world. But it got me through a lot of weeks on these phone calls. It was around 15 years later when I got the call. It was a doctor. She was sick. She'd been taken to the town hospital and was on life support. I got there within the night. It was there, on the white hospital bed. My grandmother let me know the truth. I wasn't exactly a planned baby. Her daughter, my mother, had been 15 when she met my father. He was a man, a trusted man of the town. She trusted her like an uncle. So it was easy to lure her into the trees where he would defile her. For 5 weeks after, my mother didn't say anything. It was only when it became too obvious, when she began to show, did she break down and talk to my grandmother. My grandmother wanted to call the police, but my mother begged her not to. My father was a horrifying man. She swore he would find her, even in prison, even in death. There was a fear so bad in her, she couldn't speak properly. She said he had promised her he would take care of her son, that he had a place in the woods for them to live in. Against the tears of her daughter, my grandma relented. They got married. The wedding took place in an empty church in the woods. For the next 4 years, my grandmother didn't see her daughter. When she did, it was sudden. She was bringing groceries when she saw a body lying near the edge of the woods. My mother was still alive, but just barely. She had lost so much in that time. So much hair, 60 pounds, 3 fingers. She still had me though. She held me tightly like a little life vest. Grandma had to pry her fingers open to get me some food. Over the next few hours, my grandma tried to get out as much as she could from her poor daughter. For half a decade, my mother had been dying in a nightmare. She wouldn't talk about where she'd been, only mutter about a church. She was broken in all of her spirit. Only the tiniest spark had still resided in her body by the end of it. The spark she had used to escape with me. She left him when he called me by the wrong name. My grandma finally called the police. She locked all the doors, closed all the windows, and let her family sleep in peace for the first time in years. It was only later she learned the true extent of the monstrosity her daughter had escaped. The cops had found.
Make sure that road to victory goes through Dot City.
From Prada, rolling up. I'm in a brand new model. It'll be here tomorrow. I don't got fears or problems. Only got real ones round them. Only got. It take a week to count it. Then I'm back up. Name the place and we pack up. Running these racks up. 100 meals a week after. Dying from laughter. When it come to handles, never had one. With a bad one. Made a meal today and ain't my last one. Oh, I had to get back up. I had to get back up. I can't take no off. You better call back up. I'm running it down to finish. I don't play, get down to get it. Talk about that, come slide, I'm with it. Better see me now, on God, I'm lit it. I know that you tryna go big. Better run up the cash, you love to spin. Made it, kill it, and did it again. But the intent, no, I'm down to win. I can't feel bad about it. I know you sad about it. Know you sad about it. Know you sad about it. I'm moving too fast, I can't stop. Wiping it down with the paint hot. Left hand on the wheel. I'm closing the top on the raindrop. I'm keeping the game in the headlock. When throwed and blinded my dreadlock. In the end zone with the mid dot. One phone call, get it dead stop. I feel like I own the season. Say one thing, just give me a reason. Knowing you're mad, I'm undefeated. Top dog, making it even. Oh, I had to get back up. I had to get back up. I can't take no off. You better call back up. I'm running it down to finish. I don't play, get down to get it. Talk about that, come slide, I'm with it. Better see me now, on God, I'm lit it. I know that you tryna go big. Better run up the cash, you love to spin. Made it, kill it, and did it again. But the intent, no, I'm down to win. I can't feel bad about it. I know you sad about it. Know you sad about it. Know you sad about it.
Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me what you wanna give. How much blood would you bleed? I'ma tell you I'm a misconceiver. I'm a believer. Someone better kick my fever. Tell me it's 100 degrees underneath my whole flesh. Everyone tells me it's a bit of a mess. I'ma tell the risk I was never at the end. I would never get it off my chest. Oh, I'm forgetful. Someone better tell me I was always on the edge.
to the restroom. What was I about to do?
Okay, 30,000 in the pocket, no change. Okay, I might pass the ball, but this is no game. Okay, all my girls, they love and hate me the same. Okay, so when I die, I ain't gonna be from old age. Somebody gon' want revenge, somebody might want it now. Right pocket got heroes, left pocket got pound. Somebody gon' want revenge, somebody might want it now. Throw the ball with the right hand, catch with the left, touchdown. Step back, let me get some room. Congrats every time I'm through.
Heading to the field with pinpoint accuracy, it's Dot City.
Hotel got a waiting room. Read a magazine while you wait for me. Baby, I'll be done so soon. Phone gotta be off, each store got locks. I got some trusted shoes. 10K on the countertop, don't look so shocked, it's nothing new. Death comes in threes. Winds come in
Sermon shuts them down.
throw it up, celebrate some news. I do a good job. Pull up the power and pull out. And hold on, pedal to metal. When I put my foot on, I got to put on.
Mahomes has got a cannon.
All chained, all dead. They were emaciated, but not all had died of starvation. The chains led to a dark pool where they found my father floating, naked, and smiling at them.
Take it from me.
They electrocuted him. My mother would never stop having nightmares. My grandma would wake to find her muttering in her sleep, talking of how scared she was of him, the nightmares she had of his corpse standing outside her bedroom window, asking to be let in. Near my 5th birthday, my grandmother thought she might have been getting better. She had grown quieter and more cheerful. There was a feeling about her that her suffering was about ended. On my mother's birthday, my grandmother brought home a small cake to celebrate. She found a daughter hanging from the ceiling fan. She told me of how helpless she felt that day. All her help had come so late. She had made up stories to deal with what happened. She knew she shouldn't have told me that story. The story of the Nightmaker. My father's story. It had been her way of coping. She didn't know it would have affected me that way. How it would scar me. She said she was sorry for it all. I looked at the woman who saw her daughter's abuser every time she saw me. I looked at the woman who had no reason to raise me, to not abandon me in the world. I kissed her on the forehead and thanked her for having loved me. There was so much I didn't say. How many times she saved my life, but I hoped it was enough. I held her hand and stayed with her till the day she died, 3 weeks later. I don't want to say anything good about this place we're born into. It's such a horrible, cruel place to live in. The world was cruel, but my grandmother made it so much brighter for me. Her eyes were like 2 pinpricks of light in the immeasurable darkness. The world is horrifying. That is the truth. Don't lose hope in each other. Sometimes it's the only thing keeping each other alive. Don't lose your goodwill. Don't lose your soul.
Intended target is double covered. Picked up. Giving them the ball so quickly. 4 and...
Stay at home and go anywhere. That was the clever little headline that pulled me into all of this. I could almost hear the marketing department getting a raise. Neural Empathy Hardware is what it stood for. Just an innocuous post on a harmless messaging board. The body of the text detailed a device still in its testing phases that was searching for willing participants to try out the tech. I can't find the initial post as it has since been deleted, but I remember vaguely how it was structured. Are you a homebody? Is a quiet night in more appealing than subjecting yourself to the dangers of the world? Are you looking for an adventure without the cost or the risk? Then sign up as a gazer here and be connected to adventures all over the globe from the comfort of your own home. Are you an adrenaline junkie? Do you live your life between the trees or on top of the oceans and want people to experience all the wonders you do? Then sign up as a pioneer and allow others to view the world through your eyes. There's a big world out there, and you can help everyone to see the best parts. It was one of those things I stumbled across that just screamed, "Too good to be true" at me. Even as I clicked the sign-up link, I was only asked my address. No monetary exchange was requested, and I was told that I'd receive my headset in a matter of days if I was selected. Another day went by, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that I had, in fact, been selected. My skepticism remained until I found a small white box lacking any labels, sitting all alone on my front porch. I brought it inside and opened it to find a lightweight, sleek, plug device